the SDG Summit issued a call to action. Today, you've answered that call with a rescue plan for the Sustainable Development Goals. You arrived at this summit with new ideas and stories on how your countries are working to drive progress towards the SDGs and the sustainable future all people need and deserve.
Thank you. I thank the President of
The current progress of the SDG is globally unsatisfactory. Only 12% of the targets are on track, while we have not made any progress in 30% of the other targets. We have discussed the scaling up of actions to ensure the acceleration of the SDG progress. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which includes the 17 SDGs, was adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015. Around the same time, in 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted by 196 countries at COP21. Thus, we had two highly progressive, responsive and far-reaching programs, but extremely limited resources dedicated to their success. When the global pandemic struck in 2020, it meant that these programs suffered further setback. There was no economic growth and many sectors saw the absence of any economic activity. The already limited resources were further constricted. The pandemic also aggravated the pre-existing global debt crisis, and many countries, including mine, have faced bankruptcy. The question now raised is whether SDGs are even attainable in the current scenario. Take the example of Sri Lanka. In 2019, it was estimated that 9% of our GDP would have to be invested to achieve these targets. Following the pandemic and the economic crisis, this is now not realistic. The Climate Prosperity Plan of Sri Lanka requires US $26.5 billion to be implemented before 2030. But where can countries such as mine find such funding? In 2019, it was estimated that 9% of our GDP would have to be invested to achieve these targets. Following the pandemic and the economic crisis, this is now not realistic. The Climate Prosperity Plan of Sri Lanka requires US $26.5 billion to be implemented before 2030. But where can countries such as mine find such funding? Sri Lanka's sovereign debt crisis has resulted in little or no fiscal space to channel scarce public funds towards these priority spending areas. In 2022, the debt service cost was equivalent to 151% of the government revenue that year. This situation is become evident in most parts of Asia and Africa. Today, even countries which have been spared bankruptcy are struggling. The G20 summit reiterated that developing countries require financing up to $5.9 trillion US by 2030 to fulfill their nationally determined contributions.
So now, allow me to invite the President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, His Excellency Ranil Wickremesinghe, to deliver a keynote address. Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam Moderator, I will make my contribution to debt sustainability by reducing the time taken to make my contribution. I would first bring to your attention the fate of the middle income countries, because there is no common framework, there is no procedure for the middle income countries. I will give an example of Sri Lanka. When bankruptcy was declared, all external financial dealings came to a halt. We are heading for a major political crisis again. But thanks to the fact that Sri Lanka had to apply for regraduation and was able to obtain it in a short time, and the gift of fertilizer from the US government, we were able to prevent another political crisis taking place. Therefore, I would first highlight on the need for a plan for the middle income countries in financial difficulty. Secondly, while discussing all the proposals that have been put forward, we must also look at what is available in the global economy. This year, the projected global GDP is 105 trillion US dollars. Of this, 91 trillion US dollars is the public debt. So we are working on these assumptions. We have to use what is available to begin with. Currently, $100 billion is available as a part of the IMF Resilience and Sustainability Trust. In the interim, let us utilize this fund. The first step is to get the IMF Resilience Fund to start functioning. Then the Secretary General's SDG stimulus calls for $500 billion to be made available annually to developing countries, as well as converting short-term lending into long-term debt at lower interest rates. This still has to be realized. So we must now focus on making a success of the programs, of the proposal put forward by the Secretary General. I will also say, while this is available, there are two other proposals that were made here. One is the World Bank proposal to ease out subsidies on fertilizer and fuel. I think this is a proposal worthwhile considering if the money saved can be redirected to other areas. Secondly is the WTO proposals on trade finance. Yes, that's needed. We have to ensure that there is money available for expansion of our export. Then, while we go into these issues, which will take time, you can't rush into it. What is the relief that we can give people? There, I would recommend President Ruto's proposal on writing off or giving relief of the low-income countries. I know there are genuine concerns of the creditors, which we must take into account. But I would recommend that we focus on President Ruto's proposal and we build on it. There has to be something that is, there has to be concrete relief available to the low-income countries. If we don't provide that relief immediately, we can, I think, write off all the other proposals we have. We have to address this issue. So I will not take any more of your time, but to bring to your notice that in UN on this issue we have achieved solidarity in words. Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would now like to welcome the President of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, to take the floor.
Madam Chair, Sri Lanka supports the Secretary General's accelerated agenda based on tangible climate actions which are achievable. Many of the delegates here have put forward very fruitful suggestions which must take into account. Let me talk of Sri Lanka itself. Experts have predicted that by 2050, Sri Lanka will lose 1.5% of our GDP due to climate-related issues. Therefore, Sri Lanka's climate ambition plan has adopted a dual approach. At COP27, I launched Sri Lanka's Climate Prosperity Plan as the nation's strategy for green growth based on renewable energy generations with the local advantages of wind power and solar energy. It's also a part of our economic restructuring, which is consequent to the 2022 financial crisis, because our long-term economic revival is based on Sri Lanka becoming a green economy. The second is that Sri Lanka is supporting the establishment of a climate justice forum aimed at fostering international collaboration to address climate-related challenges such as loss and damage, adaptation, and mitigation. There are two other proposals that Sri Lanka will also be making in respect of the global scenario. First is the establishment of an International Climate Change University, which will be an international platform on research and development on climate mitigation actions. The second is that we have realized that we have to realize that global resources are not limitless, and we must manage with what is available. Therefore, Sri Lanka is focusing on areas where maximum results can be achieved. In this background, Sri Lanka will be proposing the Tropical Belt Climate Ambition Project. The Tropical Belt is the most biologically diverse region on Earth. Typically, biodiversity increases as the latitude decreases. The biodiversity increases as we get closer to the equator. Vulnerable communities in tropical belts are the worst impacted by climate change. Significant investments in renewable energy, nature-based solutions, and pollution control in the tropical belt will lead to transformative changes in climate change, not only biodiversity loss and pollution control, not only in the tropical belt, but will also impact on the temperate areas outside. The nature-based solutions could contribute substantially to climate change mitigation and adaptation. There are also a number of low-income countries within the belt who will be able to benefit from the debt relief that is being proposed. Therefore, the Tropical Belt Climate Ambition Plan and the debt relief for the low-income economies within the belt will have a substantial impact on advancing the Secretary General's accelerated agenda. I don't want to take any more of the time, and we'll be discussing this at COP28, but thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. By more than 2/3 while multiplying its GDP. Currently, Romania has one of the lowest
and the projects that our respective countries are championing to ultimately collectively be able to tackle the
We've proven we can mobilize our collective ambition at the multilateral level.
Like our economy-wide price on pollution. Of course, alongside President von der Leyen and others.
Polarization and conflict, and to build a united and decarbonized society, we need to reach out to each other and build more.
Actions are needed to preserve this planet, and regrettably, I'm not sure that everyone is getting it.
Need to encompass all greenhouse gases and having water from the pork sector, despite the grave obstacles and limitations placed upon us by the government of the United States through the...
Although Pakistan has not contributed to the problem of global warming, we have chosen to be a part of the solution.
Greenhouse gas emissions of Austria went down by 6%, impactfully manage a capitalization of 50 billion, what we are calling 50 by 30.
It's opportunities for low-carbon, climate-resilient growth.
Most important and gravest challenge of our times higher on the agenda. Thank you for that.
This wasn't easy, but the time for action is now.
Madam Moderator. Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary General.
Right on time.
Right on time. Okay.
I think this is the most breathy space.
Okay.
So, I saw you everywhere.
Yes, I've been walking around and saying.
Oh, very good. So we follow up, we make sure that everything is tight.
Yes, I'm rather we must get that.
Yep. Listen to our guys, they mean well. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm ambassador to the UN.
Oh, ambassador, very nice, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
The climate change gaps. We also call for the development partners to support the CISDOC in connecting
that will speak on behalf of Pacific Small Island Development Sector.
La reforma del sistema de gobernanza actual, creado hace un siglo, no refleja la realidad de las estructuras económico-financieras, no es ya sostenible. Una arquitectura mejorada de deuda soberana global, con participación significativa de los países en desarrollo. El grupo espera que este diálogo fomente urgentemente
needs. So today I will focus on 3 areas.
In developing countries, which we support through capacity building, and this
to financing for sustainable development. We gather here today in the wake of multiple
para llevar a cabo reformas. Esto debe incluir que los países desarrollados